Well, last week together we discovered three components, or maybe think of them like as three ingredients that really lead to exceptional love, romantic relationships. And what we said last week is if we can keep these kind of three things in balance and be intentional around these things, it leads to what we all really want, that kind of vibrant, healthy, kind of sexy, romantic, long-term relationship. And so the three things we talked about last week, just for a quick review, is one of the ingredients that leads to exceptional love relationships is intimacy. And when it comes to intimacy, intimacy is that kind of that emotional or that psychological connection. Intimacy is that whole kind of like, hey, you have my back, I have your back. There's a deep level of friendship. There's a deep level of trust. Like we can do life together because of the friendship and the trust we have. That's intimacy. And then the second ingredient that leads to these love relationships is what we said is thrill. And thrill is a little bit harder to kind of talk about or really harder to get to the bottom of. But thrill's that idea when he walked into the room or she walked into the room and it was like, oh my gosh, they took my breath away. You know, that moment that like where you had butterflies, you were like, your mind was racing. What am I going to say? How am I going to say it? I mean, he's just so amazing. She's so amazing. I mean, that's thrill. And then the third ingredient to these love romantic relationships is sensuality. And when it comes to sensuality, this covers every kind of aspect or everything under the realm, under the sexual realm. And this would be all 5 your senses. This is those long walks in the park that you're just holding hands together. This is those back rubs, small kisses, deep passion, all that kind of stuff. Just everything under the sexual realm. And what we called these three ingredients is we call these things the passion triangle. And basically what we said last week is that when we're intentional around these areas, when we're intentional around sensuality and we're intentional around creating the thrill and intimacy, and we prioritize these and we're self-aware and we think about these, we have discussions with one another about these things, it's the very thing that leads to what we want. When there's balance in these three areas, the passion triangle, there's passion in that relationship. It leads to relationships like Allie and Noah have in the Notebook, because we all want this, right? Anyways, if that doesn't work for you, maybe you have another movie, you're like, that's the movie I want, that kind of relationship. But isn't it true? I mean, we all want that kind of passion. We all want that kind of love to where you have my back. There's such deep emotional connection. There's romance, and it just feels like I'm the only one in the room when I'm with you. And so we talked about that. What does that look like? And then we said this. We said, but here's the deal, and I don't think any of us choose this, but over time in love romantic relationships, what happens is these things begin to get out of balance. And when they stay out of balance long enough, it leads to what we called marriage incorporated. And marriage incorporated is where your marriage and your kind of love, long-term love, romantic relationship really feels like a business. It just feels like we're doing business together. I mean, oftentimes intimacy is fairly intact in a marriage incorporated. In other words, we're friends. I have your back. You have my back. Hey, we're doing life together, raising kids together, tag teaming. Hey, I'll bring him here and them there. We're paying bills, building equity, working hard together, taking vacations, creating some memories together. But at the end of the day, when it comes to thrill, it's unbalanced because I think he's more thrilled with his iPad. I think he's maybe more thrilled with his hobby than with me. Or I think she has more thrill for the kids, or she has more thrill for her girlfriends and hanging out than she has for me. And when there's an unbalance when it comes to thrill, eventually sensuality simply takes a back seat. And this happens in relationships. Again, I don't think we choose it. I think we kind of fall into this. And there's an ebb and flow in relationships like this, but I'm just telling you, if you stay unbalanced long enough, if you stay in marriage incorporated long enough, eventually you will find yourself feeling and saying things like this. I've just lost that love and feeling. We used to have it. She used to kind of make me nervous. He used to kind of bring those butterflies. But now, I'm not so sure. I mean, I love him. I love her. I have respect for them. I'm not sure I'm in love with them. And I'm not sure he's the right person or she's the right person. And I think perhaps You've thought that. Perhaps you've experienced that, or perhaps you will experience that. And as we said last week, I want to be very careful as we kind of make this transition here. But I know that there are exceptions to the rule of what I'm about to say and what I'm about to kind of push us forward with. I know there are exceptions, and in fact, next week we're going to talk about those. But for the far majority of us in our long-term love relationships, guys, there's something every single one of us can do. Regardless if you're a Christian or not, there is something all of us can do to bring back that love and feeling, and to bring balance back to this passion triangle. And the question is, what is that? What's that one thing? Well, last week we said it. It's one word: love. Love. And when it comes to love, love is a choice, and the choice is yours. But perhaps you see that. Perhaps you're thinking about this and you're like, really, Buck? That one thing, love, is the very thing that gives, all this balance? Like, what does that even mean? Like, honestly, love, it's just what is that? I mean, that's been debated for years. And what, theologians and philosophers, it's so perplexing. What is love? And that's the question we asked and began to answer last week. Because if we can get some clarity on this, if we can honestly bring this down to a practical, relational, kind of experiential, just you and I having coffee, talking, going, what does this look like? If we can get some handles, then we have a chance. Then it is possible to bring back some balance to each one of these three areas, which reignites or re-energizes or perhaps sustains the passion in that exceptional love relationship. So last week when we asked the question, what is love? We got to hear from an incredible individual. His name is Paul. And Paul lived 2,000 years ago. He's called the Apostle Paul. Maybe you've heard him referred to as St. Paul. Paul was a follower of Jesus Christ, and he wrote about half the New Testament. And what's so cool is Paul actually hits this question head on. It's like, Paul, what is love? And he goes, I'll tell you specifically what love is. And he says, love is. But I've got to pause us here again this week, because at this point, you would just go, well, what do you mean, Paul, love is? Love is what? What's your definition of love? Where are you pulling your response to the question? Is this just your opinion? Paul, are you like the love doctor because you took like an internet course and now you're loved? Paul, what's your basis, your definition for love? Where are you pulling this from? And Paul would look at you and me and he'd say, I'll tell you where I'm pulling it from. I'm pulling it from the person of Jesus Christ. Because Paul was a follower of Jesus. And Jesus, if he really is the Son of the living God, then he was the embodiment of love. He was the personification of love. He is the answer to the question, what is love? And Paul also understood that Jesus looks at you, looks at me, looks at all his followers of Jesus Christ, and he says, guys, I got one command for you. Not 10 commandments, not 613 commandments. Jesus says, if you choose to be my follower, I have one command. What is it, Jesus? He says, love one another the way I've loved you. Everything hinges on that one command. And Paul knew that. So Paul says, what is love? Well, he begins to think about the life of Jesus and what Jesus said and what Jesus did. And he gives us some handles to bring balance back to our passion triangle. And so we're going to recap real quick what we said last week, and then we'll just pick it up from there. So last week, Paul answered the question. He says, love is patient. Love is patient. What we said last week is that patient means love doesn't push. Love pauses. In those big romantic decisions or those big kind of decisions in your dating relationships or whatever it is, love pauses. It doesn't push. And love chooses to run at the other person's pace. Love doesn't say, hey, here's my pace. I'm going to project it on you. No, that's not patience. That's not love. Love chooses to run at the other person's pace, just as Christ did for you. And then we went on from there. And we said love is kind. And we defined kindness. And kindness is that I'm going to take my strength in the midst of your weakness for your benefit. Exactly what Jesus did for us. Jesus looks at every single one of us, and every one of us have fallen short. Every one of us have sin in our life. We're all broken. There's no perfect person, right? And Jesus recognizes this, so he comes into the world to live a perfect life. In his strength, he looks at our weakness, and he gives us his life for our benefit so we could be forgiven and have peace with our Heavenly Father. And then he says to you and to me, okay, follow me. Do as I have done. Love as I have loved you. Love is kind. And then we wrapped it up talking about this. Is love, it does not envy, it does not boast, it's not proud. In other words, love doesn't steal the spotlight. Even if you have a story, even if there is something that is spotlight worthy and it could trump whatever he or she is saying in that spotlight, love dare not push them out of the spotlight. Love dare not say, hey, I can tell the story better than you. No, love just publicly brags on her and on him and keeps them in the spotlight. That's love. Now, we said a whole lot more about that last week, so if you weren't here, I really want to encourage you to go online. You can catch up, you can watch, and see how we kind of unpacked those statements. So today, we're just going to pick it up. And Paul continues, and he thinks about the life of Jesus, and he goes, okay, I'm just telling you, what is love? Well, Jesus is. So what else? Paul says, I'll tell you. Love does not dishonor others. When I think about love, love does not dishonor others. What does that mean practically? Well, practically, you could say this. Love does not behave disgracefully, dishonorably, or indecently. In other words, love doesn't create his or her regret. Love doesn't say or insist on taking another drink. Love doesn't, say things or do things that dishonors him or her. And love certainly chooses not to listen to music that degrades, diminishes, or dishonors a woman. That's not love, because love does not dishonor. To which begs the question, well, if love does not dishonor, and I'm supposed to get some handles to bring balance to this, then what is honor? If love doesn't dishonor, what is honor? And Paul gives us kind of a working, practical definition of honor in Philippians, where he says this. He says, in humility, value others above yourself. That's honor. And isn't that exactly what Jesus did for you and for me? I mean, think about this. Less than 24 hours before Jesus was hung on a Roman cross, he's with his 12 disciples in a room. And he says to his 12 disciples, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. In other words, there's no one more powerful in the universe or on this planet than me. And right after he says that statement, what does he do? He humbles himself as a servant and washes the feet of his disciples. He honored them. Jesus gave his life in humility for you and for me to honor you. See, honor is this idea that I'm going to treat you as more significant than me. I'm going to value you. I'm going to esteem you above me. Because they're more important than you? No, that's not honor. But honor says, listen, I know we are equal in the eyes of God, but I'm going to make a choice because love is a choice and the choice is yours. I'm going to make a choice to treat you and to esteem you, to value you above me. See, that's honor. And here's the thing. Every single one of us, again, if you're a Christian or not, if you're young or old, every single one of us know how to honor. And the reason I know every one of us know how to honor is because of this. Use your imagination real quick. Think about this. Imagine you were having dinner with your favorite actor, actress, athlete, or recording artist. So whoever that may be, try to get them in your mind real quick. And if I gave you 3 seconds to think, that blink thought, who's coming to your mind that you would go, man, I'd love to have dinner with that individual. Now, once you have them in your mind, think about this. Isn't it true if you were able to have dinner with that individual, that you would bring the best version of you? Isn't that true? I mean, I promise you would stand in front of the mirror a little bit longer and you look at your hair, like if anything like me, use a little extra hairspray, to stiffen it up, You do so. I mean, you'd make sure your clothes are right. You'd make sure you get to meet with this. Oh my gosh, it's such an honor. And you would make sure to show up probably 10 or 15 minutes early. I mean, you wouldn't be late to that dinner. And at dinner, if they showed up 10 or 15 minutes, maybe even 20 minutes late, I mean, when they walked in the room, you would go, what are you thinking? You're not thinking of me? You're not thinking of anybody but you? You wouldn't do that. That's not what honor does. You would go, no, I bet there's a great explanation. They're like, oh, I'm so sorry this came up. Hey, plenty of patience you would have in that moment. And during the dinner, I promise you, you wouldn't be on one of these. And you wouldn't be sitting there going, I don't know if you hum when you do this, but anyways. But, I mean, this just wouldn't be there. It would be like, in your purse or, somewhere else. I mean, it would just be absent because you would be, oh, my gosh, Like, I'm so curious, and you would ask them questions of curiosity, ask them questions of discovery. You would listen to the words that they had to say. You know why? Because you would honor that opportunity, and you would bring the best version of you, and you know how to do that, and I know how to do that. You know, this week, as I was thinking about me just personally, like, who would I meet with? Like, of all the people that I could meet with, you know, and this probably changes every week. You know, one week I'd want to meet with somebody. But this week, as I was thinking about who would I want to meet with, a famous, you know, individual, I'd want to meet with this guy right here, old Tom Brady. Any Patriot fans? Oh, you guys represent well. There you go. Anyways, I would love to meet with this guy. I promise I'd be early, and I'd, you know, make sure my hair is super, you know, tight or whatever. I don't know the phrase, but whatever that is. And I would sit there, and with Tom, I would just be so curious, like, Tom, what are you going to do? You going to retire? You know, what team are you going to play for? Like, give me the inside scoop. And I'd love to hear that. And then, you know what I talked to him about? I talked to him about leadership. Because think of his role. I mean, what I hear in interviews of other people on the other side of Tom, they're just like, he's a phenomenal leader. He can bring such a diversity of people and a diversity of personalities and bring such synergy and unity on that field. It's incredible, and everybody has this respect for Tom. I'm like, Tom, tell me about that. It's incredible leadership. And I would love to hear about success. I mean, so many of us are chasing success. He's got to the pinnacle of everything we're chasing. And I'd be curious, hey, tell me what it's like. You got to the finish line. You got to the pinnacle. Is it really what it's all cracked up to be? I would just honor that opportunity. And my point is this, is love does not dishonor others. Love makes a choice, because love is a choice, and the choice is yours to choose to honor. So when it comes to honoring him or her, how are you doing with that? When it comes to your wife or maybe your husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, you know, significant other, on the other side of them, if they had a very open opportunity to say, yes, he honors, yes, she honors, what would they say? How are you doing when it comes to honor? And listen carefully. If you're in a dating relationship, this is very specific to dating relationship. If you're in a dating relationship and on the other side of the person you're dating, you feel dishonored over and over and over, and you feel put down over and over and over. And I'm not just saying that one time. We're all broken. We all make mistakes, right? I'm just saying this is like day after day, week after week, month after month. If you feel dishonored consistently, then listen carefully. It's time to go. You need to leave that relationship. And the reason why I would say you need to leave that dating relationship is because the longer you stay there, you may come to the conclusion that you are dishonorable. You may come to the conclusion that you don't have the worth to be honored. And I'm just telling you, nothing is further from the truth. Your heavenly Father, he knit you together in your mother's womb. He's given you purpose and meaning and significance. He's given the very Son, his one and only Son, for your life. You have such worth and such value. And if you are consistently dishonored in that dating relationship, I would say it is time to go, because love does not dishonor. And then Paul continues. What else, Paul? Paul says, well, as I think about Christ, I mean, love is not self-seeking. Gosh, you know, Jesus gave his life for you. There's nothing more selfless you could do. And love is not self-seeking. Now, we don't say it this way in our culture. We would probably say something like this, that love is not selfish. I mean, love is just not selfish. That's what love chooses to do. And here's what's so cool about selflessness. When it comes to the passion triangle and sensuality and thrill and intimacy, this is experientially true, which is one of the tests of truth. This is experientially true. This is one of the things you really have to consider. If you've ever been on the other side of a secure, worthy individual that's not trying to get their security and worth from you, but a secure, worthy individual who is selfless towards you, who says, hey, I'm going to defer to you, who says, hey, tell me more about that, who puts your interest above their interest. If you've ever been in a conversation in a room with somebody like that, especially in a love romantic relationship, isn't it experientially true that it feels like you're the only person in that room? Like you're the only person that matters to them? Like they're so thrilled they get to have a conversation with you because of selflessness? Isn't that true that it leads to intimacy, these deep emotional connections, more discovery about you and about because they're choosing to be selfless? And when intimacy and thrill are there, then hello, sensuality, you know, you get to take a step there as well, right? If you've ever felt that, you know exactly why Paul would say, this is love. Love is not selfish. Now, again, if you're in a dating relationship and you go, well, Buck, how do I know if the person I'm dating is selfish or selfless? Like, how do I know? Here's what I would suggest. I would just say in that dating relationship, choose to do what Jesus Christ did for you. Choose to love as Christ loved you. And choose to be selfless. Choose to defer. Choose to put their interest, up here. Choose to do that. And here's the deal. If you give and give and give, and then you discover that the person on the other side of you takes and takes and takes, then my suggestion for you is to run and run and run. Right? I know that was super complex. Let's go over this again. No. Anyways, but that's the point. I mean, I think we all get this. We're like, yeah, if I'm giving and giving and giving, and they're taking advantage of my selflessness, then perhaps they're not the person for you. But I'm telling you, in a dating relationship, if you give and give and give, and they reciprocate that, and they give and give and give back to you, then perhaps you have found the one. Why? Because love is not selfish. Love says, Jesus, I'm going to follow you. You said, follow me. Where are you going to take me? You're going to take me to love as you have loved me, which is selflessness. And then Paul continues, and he says something that really hits home for me, and I'll explain this in a second. He says, love is not easily angered. Love is not easily angered. In other words, love doesn't become angry easily. It doesn't have that 0 to 10. I just go boom and I explode. That huge reaction. Love doesn't carry a stick of dynamite with you everywhere you are. So your kids are walking on their tiptoes going, am I going to make dad mad? Am I going to make mom mad? Am I going to make them mad? That's not love. Or your spouse, your significant other isn't going, I have to say the right thing, do the right thing, because if not, that dynamite, it's going to go off. It's going to explode. Love is not easily angered. So practically, you and I are just talking. If you say, well, what does that look like practically to begin to bring balance back to the passion triangle? Give me a handle for that. Well, I would say this. I'd say what that means for us practically, love chooses to respond rather than react. To respond rather than react. Reaction is emotional and anger-filled oftentimes. Response is where you get that rich relational fabric. And guys, the reason I would say this is because I've been very honest. If you've come to North Point for a while, I've struggled with this the majority of my life. Because I grew up in a home, on the other side of parents, that what was modeled to me, what I thought was normal in a romantic, marriage relationship was reaction. Whoever yelled the loudest got control. Whoever demonstrated the most drama and shame and hurt, and whoever could kind of win the argument in a very reactive way, they're the ones who won the argument. They're the ones who got control. And then in terms of a little boy growing up in that kind of environment around my father had a stick of dynamite everywhere he went. And as a little boy, I was constantly on eggshells thinking, man, I got to say the right thing, do the right thing, otherwise he's going to explode, and that is entirely too painful to feel again. And so he taught me, this is how you get control, is you react. You yell loud enough, do whatever you need to do loud enough, and relationally, in that relationship, the way you get control is by reaction. So what did I do? I got married. And when I married Jill, my beautiful wife, within the first couple months, she saw that I was carrying a stick of dynamite. And a couple times it came out on her to where it's just really explosive yelling and all this kind of stuff. But typically the way it came out on Jill is much more passive aggressive, where I would just turn off. And I wouldn't turn off to go, hey, I need some time to process this. I would turn off for days or turn off for weeks. And I would listen to that little voice that would just say, don't feel anything. And there was a subtlety in that, because the longer I thought I did that, perhaps it would punish her. It would control my marriage and get her to do what I wanted to do. And then we had kids. When my boys didn't do what I wanted them to do, well, I just did what my father did. You're not acting the way you're acting. You're not behaving the way I want you to behave. So the way I'm going to get control with you is I'm going to react and explode. And I've shared with you guys, if you've been here the last few months, that's my greatest regret in life. As I think about my whole life, I think, yeah, that's it. For the years and years and years, I chose to react. Then about 7 years ago, I was meeting with my counselor and talking about this whole discussion. We were talking about all this stuff, and my counselor said, Buck, do you know the difference between reacting and responding? All these things you're talking about are relational. They're not like emergency things you need to react, but these are so relational. Do you know the difference? And she began to explain the difference. This is fueled by anger. When you react, you don't have time to consider the narrative. You don't have time to consider their story. You draw and assume the worst conclusions really quickly. But response is this idea to go, hey, I'm going to consider, there may be another version, I'm going to consider their story. And so she said, hey, Buck, next time you come home and the boys aren't doing what you want to do or whatever it is, just walk into your room for 5 minutes. For 5 minutes. Don't let that stick of dynamite go. Walk into your room for 5 minutes and invite God into that situation. Just say, hey, God, what would you do? God, what does love require of me with my sons or with Jill? Because that was hurtful. What does love require of me? And guess what happens when you respond? You have time to consider their story. I have time to consider, well, maybe Jill told the boys to do something opposite than what I said. Or maybe, they're being a 7-year-old. Instead of treating them like they should be 35 and projecting, hey, you should be as mature as a 35-year-old. I'm like, oh, I forgot they're 7. It gives me time to respond and then walk out after 5 minutes and just go, hey, do you think we could talk, boys? Do you think we could talk about this? Or babe, do you think we could have a conversation in that kind of relational tone? So listen, that's me, but how about you? When it comes to easily angered, are you carrying around a stick of dynamite? Are you reacting, or would you say you more naturally lean over here to responding? And here's what's so important to know. When you hear this, sometimes you're like, Buck, you just don't understand because, they just push my buttons. And you're right. They may push your buttons. But this is so important. If you haven't paid attention to this point, please pay attention. But those are your buttons. And you may push on that and go, well, Buck, here's the deal. I think the thing you don't understand is if I met the right person, they wouldn't make me angry. It's just, he's the wrong person. She's the wrong, the wrong person. Well, listen, here's the deal. You're right. If you met him or her, they wouldn't make you angry. And the reason why is because no one has ever made you angry. They have simply just brought the anger out of you. What was in you came out of you. Guys, what's so important to understand when it comes to anger is that your reactions are your reactions. Yeah, she said that. Yeah, she did that. Yeah, that was hurtful. But Buck, my reactions are my reactions. And your anger is your anger. Just like my anger is my anger. They simply brought what was in me out of me. And wherever I go, there I am. So, when it comes to anger, how are you doing? When it comes to your kids, are you trying to get control relationally through responding, taking the time to consider the other narrative? Or is it reaction? When it comes to your love romantic relationships, would they say, there's patience on the other side of that? It's not easily angered, or are you easily angered? And when it comes to anger, if you're anything like me and you're like, oh man, Buck, I really wrestle with this. I can resonate with what you're saying. If that's true, then listen, here's the deal. You got to get to the root of the anger. And this is not the Sunday and the teaching to get to the root of anger, but you got to get to the root of anger. You got to get in front of a counselor, in front of a small group leader, whatever it is, and get to the root of it. And most oftentimes, anger is just unprocessed hurt. That's what it is. And we so oftentimes in our culture sweep things under the rug. Hey, my first marriage, no big deal. Hey, that big relationship, no big deal. Hey, we just need to move on. Time's going to heal. Time never heals. Time just numbs. And when the emotion comes back, oftentimes it's bigger than it was in the moment. We got to take the time to get to the root of our hurt. Because once we do and work through the steps and stages of forgiveness, it doesn't necessarily let them off the hook. It lets you off the hook. And it allows you to be in a posture to respond. Love is not easily angered. And then Paul continues. And he turns the corner on something else that I really wrestle with. I don't know about you guys, but he says this. He says, love keeps no records of wrongs. Love keeps no records of wrongs. What does this look like practically? If I had to break it down in just a conversation about romantic love relationships, what does this look like? It looks like this, is love does not keep a file cabinet of wrongs. Have you guys ever been on the other side of somebody who keeps a file cabinet of wrongs? You say that thing or you do that, and they're like, Okay, go ahead and open this up. You know, you said that. Let me pull your file out. You said that May 15th of 2014. I know it's 6 years ago, but I keep good records. And you said that at 1 p.m. You always say that. See, I got it documented the whole way. And you feel that, and you're on the other side of that, and you're like, are you kidding me? You really have a file? Like, what are you doing? And guys, as I said, I'm so guilty of this. This is an area I really struggle with. In fact, on the other side of Jill, when I go down, when I open my file cabinet, Jill will respond to me. She's like, babe, you know what's happening? I'm like, what's happening? I'm just showing you how I'm right. She says, you're being the historian. You're the historian. See, I have with the boys or with Jill, it's just like, yesterday and last week and last year and over the last 5 years and 10 years, let me just tell you. And I'm telling you, if you've ever been on the other side of somebody who keeps a file cabinet of wrongs, isn't it true that they're rarely wrong? In other words, think of it this way. Isn't it true someone who keeps a file cabinet of wrongs rarely keeps track of their own record of wrongs? And when you bring it up and you go like, listen, here we go again. Yeah, you're never wrong. And you respond that way, they go, oh, I knew it. Let me go back here. You say, I'm never wrong all the time. You said it back in January, on January 2nd, on January 8th. You just keep telling me I'm never wrong. And you watch them pull out their files, and you're like, are you kidding me? This is exhausting because there's no headway, there's no responding, and that certainly is not love. And by the way, it's not what God did for you. Because think about what God did for you. God sent his one and only son, Jesus Christ, into the world to pay for our wrongs. And God has a file cabinet of wrongs on you a mile long. He does. But here's what's so cool about God, that through Jesus Christ, God just doesn't bring it up. He doesn't bring it up. And he knows exactly what's in there. But he makes a choice not to bring it up with you because that's what love chooses to do. And when it comes to his or her wrongs, listen, you can be right. You can be exactly right. Yeah, she said this again. Yeah, he did this again. But be careful because you can be exactly right and end up exactly alone. And then our tendency is to play the blame game. Well, if she would just, if he would just, if she would just, if I just met the right person. Perhaps we just need to stand in front of a mirror and look right here. See, love does not keep a file cabinet of wrongs. Love does what God does for us. I know they're there. I simply make a choice not to bring them up. And yes, I know, it's hard. Yes, I know, it's been hurtful. Yes, I know when she or he continues to do that, it's hard, but it's better. It's better. That what Jesus is inviting you and me into is better. And this is why we say all the time here at North Point, following Jesus will make your life better and make you better at life. And then Paul begins to wrap this whole thing up. And he says this, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in truth. It always protects. In other words, in that love romantic relationship, it doesn't smuggle anything into that relationship that would hurt the relationship. It doesn't smuggle, perhaps debt, or it doesn't smuggle these secrets, or it doesn't smuggle a hidden past. Hey, I'm going to bring this into this relationship, and it's ultimately not protecting the relationship. That's not what love does. Love always protects. And then love always trusts. In other words, when there's a gap between what I expected and what I experienced, hey, I have a choice in the gap. I'm just going to choose love because love is a choice and the choice is yours. To say, I'm going to believe the best. I bet there's a good reason why they're home at 6 instead of 4 o'clock until proven otherwise. And love always hopes for the best in this relationship. And love always perseveres. I feel like giving up, but I'm going to choose to trust you and persevere. That's love. So, to break it all down and to kind of bring it home, the question we ask is this: what is love? So many opinions, so many different, perplexing responses to this question. But if we look at the life of Jesus Christ, what is love? Well, love is patient, kind, not jealous, not arrogant, honoring, selfless, not easily angered, not a scorekeeper, protecting, trusting, hopeful, persevering. That's love. And when we see this or look at this list, we're like, oh my goodness, that's a lot. I mean, that just feels overwhelming. That feels like I could never live up to that list. That just feels like, are you kidding me? These are the things that actually bring balance. Those things are your handles here. But it's tough. But even though it is hard, and even though it does feel a little bit overwhelming, isn't it true that this is what you want in your dating relationship? Isn't this true? This is what you want in ultimately what you want in your romantic love relationship? See, I love the way that Paul wraps this whole thing up. Because what Paul says next, after he talks all this love, 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 what he says next is like out of left field. You're like, are you in the same conversation? But it is so strategic and it is so relational what he says. He says this. He finishes the whole thing. And it's like, where are you going, Paul? He says, when I was a child. What? Yeah, when I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. Okay, Paul, I guess I'm following you. Yeah, I mean, when you're a little boy, we don't criticize what you say and what you do and how you reason and connect dots. You're a little boy, you're a little girl. I get it. Yeah. Paul, what's your point? He says, but when I became an adult, when I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. Paul, what does this mean? I think Paul is empathizing with us and he's saying, I get it's hard. And I get it just feels like it's too much. It's too overwhelming. I mean, she needs to take the first step. He needs to go first. If he does it, then I will. If he does it, then I will. But I think what Paul is saying here in the most gentle, relational way, he's saying, that's childish. That's childish. And I think ultimately what he's saying, again, in the most gentle way, he's saying, guys, it's time to grow up. It's time to grow up. It's time to step into the shoes of an adult and put those childish ways behind us. In other words, perhaps he's saying, that are you willing to abandon the assumption that once you meet the right person, you'll magically become a different person? I get the feeling of that, but that's fairy tale. I mean, that's what we do when we're little boys and little girls. One day I'm going to meet Mr. Right. One day I'm going to be, this princess. One day, and then everything will be okay if I just meet the right person. I think if you live enough life, if you've lived enough life, you know this, is that it just doesn't happen by accident. It's not magic. Love is a choice, and the choice is yours. That's childish. And I think Paul says, let's grow up, guys. And so perhaps he would say, are you willing, or are you ready to do the difficult work of becoming the person you're looking for is looking for? Man, I want this vibrant, passionate, healthy, sexy relationship, romantic relationship. Okay. Well, are you ready today to take a step in and start making choices to become the person that the person you're looking for is looking for? And if you're married, perhaps this is the question. Are you ready to do the difficult work of becoming the person who married you was hoping for? There is something every single one of us can do to begin to bring thrill and sensuality and intimacy back into balance. But it's a choice. And ultimately, the choice is yours and the choice is mine. Now, let me say one last thing and then we're done. If you hear all this and you go, Buck, I just so want to push against all of this because I did it. I made those choices. And guess what? It didn't bring balance back to the passion triangle. Guess what? He left. She left. And I am left with a mountain of heartache. I'm left with a mountain of hurt and heartbreak. What do I do now? What do I do now? That's a fair question. And we're going to address that next week. But for every one of us today, and for those of you listening online, listen, the bottom line, again, is love is a choice, and the choice is yours. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you so much for today, and thank you that we can have conversations like this that are a little bit more pointed, and just our conversations that perhaps can help us all take a step ultimately to trust you. Father, I pray for my life, I pray for all of our lives that as we think about these things, that you just make it really tangible this week, the step that we need to take to choose to trust you and to choose to love. What does that look like? And Father, then give us the courage to do that. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next week.